Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm here today, Michael Barry just mentioned, I work for an American newspaper. I'm the Istanbul bureau chief of the New York Times. And I did cover Afghanistan for 10 years after 9/11 as a reporter for the New York Times. So I take full responsibility for the failure to perhaps report the right things in the right ways. We're all rethinking a lot what we could have done better. But I'm actually here today as an editor of my father's book, Afghan Napoleon. You've seen it already. It's going to be on sale here, and he will be signing later. And in fact, we will have him read an extract. But I wanted to give you a bit, because we're talking about Ahmad Shah Massoud today, I wanted to give you a bit of an insight of the remarkable, never published before diaries that my father was given access to by the family of the Massoud, and Ahmed Wali Massoud in particular was helpful there. Because it shows something of the man. It's never been heard before or read before. And as I helped edit and finish the book and bring it to publication, and it was just published a couple of weeks ago, I became fascinated by the diaries of Ahmad Shah Massoud. And so I was going to read a few, or go over a bit. Can I put this on here? Just to give you a feel of it, because I think this is something that is so much of his life and adventures and the wars is known, but these are elements that perhaps are not. So what I think was amazing as well was that it took my father, who worked on this book for about 10 years, some time to actually learn that Ahmad Shah Massoud had written a diary. And he actually kept a diary for most of his life, from very early on in the early 1970s, when he was in his late teens, early 20s. I'm going to quote my father. He wrote them by hand in exercise books, usually late at night. And because of the hectic nature of his life, constantly embroiled in wars, at irregular intervals, whenever he had time. And there are cases where he writes, now I'm sitting in a rainstorm in a Jeep, the brother Mujahideen are praying, and I'm taking the chance to catch up on my diary. So you read things like that. Another time, he's sitting in a chai khana having some tea. Another time, he's sitting in a house and he can hear the Soviet jets circling over. So there's some amazing passages where you really feel the life. As my father wrote, they throw a fascinating light on Massoud's role in the war against the Soviets, in particular because the volumes that we were given were from the 1980s, from his time fighting the Russians. We haven't seen all the diaries. He goes on, they whet one's appetite for more details, especially those describing the critical moments of his career. So unfortunately, we did not see all the diaries. They are with members of the family, and it was very difficult to actually gain full access. And so this is giving you a sample of what we saw, in the hope that in the future, the rest of the diaries will be made available to scholars and to authors, because they are an incredible record throughout his life, from his, as I mentioned, early 20s through right till his assassination. We know there was a final diary with him when he was killed, and it has been kept safe. I hope they've all been kept safe since the latest developments. But there is a great need, I think, to see the rest of them. One thing that comes across exceptionally in his in the diaries of the 80s was, of course, the very, very tough fighting that the Russians imposed on the Panjshir Valley and on Massoud's forces. They did, as you all know, I'm sure, 9 offensives against the Panjshir And he writes at one point, very impressively, in 1984, he's in the Panjshir in Jaraub, he says, defeat and failure are bad and bitter, and no doubt there is nothing worse than defeat in armed combat against an implacable enemy. But with all the grief and misfortune that defeat and failure bring, yet sometimes they are the precursors of victory, a great victory that previously could not have been imagined. And he is remarkable in that he often goes through great difficulty and describes some defeats, some harsh challenges, and then he always has some optimism or some decision that he makes, and he prepares a new battle, he has a strategy, and that really comes across in the diaries. He's often very self-critical. He often chastises himself for his own laziness, or for not reading enough, for not expanding his knowledge enough. And then he's also amazingly frank about the difficulties, the difficulties of supply lines, the shortage of ammunition, the treachery of fellow Afghans or Afghans from other groups who are supposed to be Mujahideen fighting, but he understands are sometimes in alliance with the Russians to cut off his supplies. So he writes it all. He doesn't stint, and I think there is some criticism of some characters who have now died. So really fascinating details. I'm just going to give you another example. Sorry, I've gone through. Yeah, here we go. This is just a sample of what you'll see. Right now, some Su-22s jets are circling above my head. It's not yet clear where they are going to drop their bombs. Probably they will busy themselves bombing the adjacent valleys, and very probably they're going to bomb the exact place where we are now. I do not know why these fools have now taken things so seriously. He's talking about the Russians there. So he's about to be bombed, but he actually makes light of it. He says, I hope they do not land commandos. That was one of the most difficult passages he had when the Russians dropped commandos into the heights. And then he goes on, the enemy has probably received news of the presence of our Mujahideen and is probably also aware of my own presence here. But we shall see what we shall see. And then there's a next passage, he turns the page, so we're not quite sure when he wrote this, but perhaps immediately after, he goes very deep and very personal. He asks a question, right now, am I afraid of death? No, definitely not. I swear by God, if I were killed at this moment, I would be satisfied to die. And I have full faith that God would respect his promises and would forgive my sins, greater or lesser, and would grant me eternal life and peace as my portion. He goes on to say his real concern is for his Mujahideen. If he gets killed, what would happen to them? He says, this is a painful thought, but not so painful as all that. For God looks after all men, and they believe in him, and he has power over all, and he is stronger than all, and more long-lasting and firm. And if one door shuts, 100 other doors will open. That's very typical of him. I found there was another passage, which I'm not sure if I will find right now, where he talks about his own harsh defeat on an occasion, and then he says, but my own optimism and decision-making has returned, and he goes forward. He's picks himself up time and again. It's really remarkable. I don't want to run too long because it would be nice to have questions. So I'm just going to read a final passage which shows something of the softer part of the man. As you know, he was a great lover of books, great lover of poetry, and he had a talent for writing himself. So this was written in Jangalak, his home village, of Panjshir in 1998. So already the Russians are preparing to leave. He knows that they've decided to withdraw. The sun is setting and its last rays are about to hide behind the mountains. I can see the beautiful landscape from my library. Today, from noon, I came to my library and I fixed its door and heater. The room became warm and the library was ready for use. The valley and its mountains are covered with a blanket of snow. Only on the banks of the river does water flow, and it forms a black line along the white landscape. The snow-covered mountains, the clear skies, the Maidan Shah, the Sariband were all beautiful today. I'm going to end there. There's only one last thing I would mention, which is slightly different, but I noticed that I'm the only woman speaking today. That's fine. I'm very happy to be here. But I would like to say that Masood, I did meet Masood a couple of times myself. He was always, completely courteous and ready to listen to a woman. And we have another great guest here, Nasreen Gross, today, who's sitting in the row here. And just talking to her about it, we both recalled that Masood actually was not only a moderate, but also remarkable in his acceptance of women, his recognition that women helped in the jihad and were partners in the war. And right late in his life, and we mentioned it's mentioned just at the end of my father's book, he received a women's delegation, when he was up against the Taliban, I think in 2000, and he agreed to sign a recognition of women's international rights, or basically women's basic rights for Afghanistan. And he was prepared to host a conference for women. Some women's delegations visited him in Khojabaudin or in Panjshir, I forget, in Panjshir. And so I think that is something we must remember, because he really was forward-looking and he was inclusive for all ethnicities and all genders, which was great. So I just made that final comment. Thank you very much.